Let me tell you something that might make the last few weeks make sense. On January the 3rd, the United States military captured the president of Venezuela and flew him to New York to face trial. The President of the United States then announced that America would run Venezuela specifically for its oil. A week later, he threatened to invade Greenland, a NATO ally, saying we're going to do something whether they like it or not. And in Minneapolis, federal agents shot and killed an unarmed woman. If you're watching this and thinking this feels like chaos, you're right. But it's not random. It's not just one man losing his mind. It's not even really about politics in the way we usually think about it. What we're seeing is what Michael Clare calls resource wars. We're moving from a world of diplomacy and free markets back to a world of kinetic extraction. Once you see the structural pressure behind these moves, everything that feels shocking and unprecedented starts to make terrible, logical sense. We keep asking, is this fascism? Has he gone insane? These are questions about symptoms. The real question is, what structural changes have produced this behaviour? To find these changes, we have to look back at the moment the alarm bells first started ringing. For many of us, that was 2016. Even detached observers such as myself treated that election like a culture war or a fluke. But in hindsight, 2016 was the starting pistol. Think of a society like a giant engine. To keep it running smoothly, to pay for the schools and the pensions and the social peace, that engine needs the constant flow of fuel. Not just enough to run, but a surplus, an extra bit of energy left over after the bills are paid. That surplus is what funds the promises of democracy. For 70 years, that tank was overflowing. But by 2016, the gauge finally hit the red zone. It was the moment the physical energy surplus of the West dropped just low enough that people at the top realised they couldn't keep their promises and keep their power at the same time. As Peter Turchin argues in his work on cliodynamics, societies have wealth pumps that move money from the bottom to the top. When times are good, the pump is slow and everyone feels like they're winning. But 2016 was the signal that the pump had reached its limit. We hit what's called popular immiseration, the point where the average person's life stops getting better and starts getting worse. The mask didn't just fall off in 2016, it was discarded because it had become too expensive to wear. The princes realised that the post-war social contract was a luxury they could no longer afford. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The normal we've been mourning since 2016, it wasn't actually normal. We've been living in a thermodynamic freak accident. Now when I say thermodynamic, I'm not talking about engines and steam traps. I'm talking about the physics of survival. You see, every society has a work budget. To build a skyscraper, to ship a strawberry across the ocean in January, or to keep a hospital running, you have to do physical work. For most of human history, that work was done by muscles, human or animal. It was slow and there wasn't much left over. But the golden age happened because we found a way to cheat the budget. We tapped into millions of years of stored sunlight in the form of fossil fuels. Suddenly, 1 gallon of gasoline could do the same amount of work as 100 people working for a week. That's the thermodynamic miracle. We didn't get smarter or better in the 1950s. We just became the first humans in history with a massive, unearned energy inheritance. We mistook a temporary spending spree for a permanent law of nature. And to understand why the world feels like it's breaking today, we have to perform an autopsy on the golden age of the 1950s, say to the late 70s. We think of that era as a blueprint we can return to. But historians like Joseph Tainter tell us it was actually a period of unsustainable complexity. It was powered by a miracle. In the 1930s and 40s, the energy return on investment for oil was 100 to 1. You poked a hole in the ground and wealth gushed out almost for free. That massive surplus is what paid for the middle class, the suburb and the pensions. But as Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen warned, we were just building an entropy debt. We weren't growing, we were spending our children's inheritance. We built a world that requires 60-to-1 energy returns just to stay upright. Today, we're at 10-to-1 or even 6-to-1. We're falling off the net energy cliff. The Golden Age didn't fail because of bad leaders or bad policy. It failed because the physical conditions that created it are gone. And when the physical surplus disappears, the princes go back to their historical default. When I use the word princes, I'm not being metaphorical. I'm identifying a permanent structural role in human hierarchy. Whether you call them the feudal lords of the 14th century, the Politburo, or today's asset managers and tech moguls, the role is the same. As Peter Turchin explains in his research on elite overproduction, the princes are a class of people whose sole function is to capture and control the surplus produced by everyone else. For a few decades, during that golden age we just talked about, the princes were caged. Between the 90% tax brackets, strong unions, and the physical abundance of cheap oil, they were forced to share. They played by the rules because the pie was growing so fast that they could still be kings while you bought a home on a single income. But as we hit the net energy cliff, the truce ended. When the pie stops growing, the princes don't accept the smaller size. They use their power to break the cage. As Walter Scheidel notes in The Great Leveller, extreme inequality is almost never fixed by voting. It's usually only levelled by catastrophe. The princes know this. That's why they've stopped pretending to care about the social contract and have reverted to their historical default, securing their share through raw force. But they didn't go kinetic immediately. First, they tried to cheat the clock. By the late 1970s, the real energy surplus was already flatlining. If we followed the laws of physics, the golden age should have ended then. But the princes found a loophole. As Bas van Bavel argues in The Invisible Hand, when productive economies begin to fail, they turn to financialization. We stopped building things and started building debt. We turned homes into speculative assets, education into lifelong debt instruments, and the entire global economy into a stack of derivatives that were 50 times larger than the actual resources they represented. We used leverage to fake the growth of the 1950s. We were borrowing energy from a future that hadn't been born yet, hoping we'd find a miracle before the bill came due. 2016 was the moment the bill arrived. The financial door slammed shut because you can't leverage a shrinking foundation forever. And when the spreadsheet stops working, the princes have only one move left. They have to go out and take what they need by force. The princes are betting that your battery is at zero. They're betting that the teetering mess of global finance and the kinetic extraction of new resources are so complicated and your life is so hard that you'll just look away. They don't need to formally dismantle democracy if they can create conditions where it simply exhausts itself. Democracy, real functioning democracy, has a maintenance cost. It requires bandwidth, the time, the energy and stability needed to pay attention and hold power accountable. But as extraction intensifies, that bandwidth disappears. When you're working 2 jobs to keep up with rent and groceries, your attention naturally narrows to survival. This isn't a bug in the system. For the princes, it's a feature. They want a population that's too tired and too fragmented to effectively resist. But here's where the optimist in me kicks in. Once you see the machine for what it is, a thermodynamic engine that's run out of fuel, you realise the princes aren't all powerful. They're just the most desperate passengers on a sinking ship. The moment you stop trying to fix their broken engine and start looking at the tools we actually have, the horizon changes. We aren't just at the end of an era of growth, we're at the beginning of an era of design. We live in a global, complex, and potentially dangerous world, and we can't wish that away. But we have something previous generations didn't. We have the data. Now, I personally believe AI could be one of the greatest collaborative tools for humanity. The navigator that finally allows us to map every joule of energy and every gram of matter with surgical precision. But we have to be honest. We're only at the very beginning of that journey, and it's a journey fraught with risk. The challenge isn't just technological or architectural. The real danger is elite capture. If the princes control the models, AI becomes the ultimate engine for extraction, a way to squeeze the last drop of surplus out of a dying system with terrifying efficiency. Our actionable future isn't about finding a new miracle to exploit. It's about a tug of war over these tools. It's about ensuring that our brilliance is used to build a circular civilization, one that respects the physical limits of our planet rather than just building a more efficient cage. So, what does this actually look like in the real world? It looks like moving the surplus back into the hands of the people who create it. It's about moving from a system of employment to a system of provisioning. If the age of AI means the cost of doing work drops to almost zero, the only question that matters is, who owns the machine? So this is what we need to do. We need localized energy sovereignty. We have to stop being customers of global energy cartels. The future is community-owned microgrids. When a neighbourhood owns its solar arrays and its storage, energy stops being a bill you pay and starts being a shared utility that powers the community for free once the hardware is paid for. It's about regenerative food commons. Industrial farming is kinetic extraction. It strips the soil to feed the spreadsheet. We move towards regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and agroecology, not just because it's green, but because it's resilient. A community that can feed itself through local land trusts is a community that cannot be starved into submission by a broken supply chain. It's about the distributed workshop. We're ending an era of planned obsolescence. We build local circular labs, places where AI-guided 3D printing and robotic repair shops turn what used to be trash back into tools. We maximise the utility of every gram of matter we already have. This breaks our dependence on the prince's global shipping lanes. We reclaim our cognitive bandwidth. This is the most radical step. We have to intentionally cage the digital noise. By reclaiming our attention from notification engines, we gain the cognitive surplus needed to actually organise. You cannot build a new world if you're too exhausted to think. This isn't just lifestyle advice, it's a design shift. If the community owns the energy, the farm, the repair lab, then the surplus produced by AI doesn't go to a billionaire's bank account, it goes into making your life more stable. We aren't waiting for a government check. We're building a world where the check isn't necessary because the survival is already provided for. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like the S word. You're worried that if the community owns the basics, the power, the food, the repair labs, we'll lose the fire. That we'll lose the personal drive, the ambition, and the entrepreneurial spirit that actually moves us forward. But look at the ledger today. Is the current system actually rewarding your ambition? Right now, the princes have most of us in a bandwidth trap. You can't start a business, you can't invent a new tool, and you can't write that novel because you're one missed paycheck away from the street. The current system doesn't encourage risk, it punishes it. What I'm describing isn't a world where everyone gets the same outcome. It's a world where the floor is made of stone instead of quicksand. When your energy, your food, and your basic survival are guaranteed by the community-owned commons, you're finally free to be an entrepreneur. You can take a risk on a new idea because failure doesn't mean your kids go hungry. We aren't doing away with betterment, we're doing away with survival-based coercion. We're shifting from an economy where you work to avoid death to one where you work to create value. That's where the real brilliance happens. So, I've spent this time performing an autopsy on the Golden Age. We've seen how it was a temporary accident, a thermodynamic miracle that we mistook for a permanent law of nature. And we've seen how the princes, faced with a shrinking surplus, have reverted to their historical default of kinetic extraction. It's easy to look at this and feel despair. But despair is just another form of bandwidth collapse. It's a way of checking out when the ledger gets too hard to read. I believe in the power of human ingenuity. I see things like AI, and I see a tool that could allow us to map every atom in our supply chain, to create truly circular worlds where waste is a solved problem. But technology is a navigator, not a saviour. If we use it to find better ways to extract, or more efficient ways for princes to enforce conformity, we're just building a faster engine for a car that's headed for a cliff. The real actionable future isn't about finding a new energy miracle to go back to 1950. That door's closed. The future's about an honest ledger. It's about demanding a society that acknowledges the net energy cliff instead of pretending it doesn't exist. It's about building local resilience so that our survival doesn't depend on a prince seizing an oil field 10,000 miles away. It's about deciding that human flourishing is measured by how well we care for each other within our means, rather than how much surplus we can squeeze out of a planet that's already exhausted. The starting pistol fired in 2016. The race is on, but it's not a race to see who can take the most. It's a race to see who can transition to a stable, circular way of living before the system breaks entirely. The princes will always be there, trying to convince you that the only way to be safe is to let them take more. But their power relies on your exhaustion. The most radical thing you can do is to protect your bandwidth. Stay curious, organise locally, and stop asking if we can go back. We're moving forward into a world that's dangerous and interconnected, but it's also a world where the truth is finally out in the open. The era of imaginary growth is over. The era of reality has begun.